Hi, and welcome to this fall meeting panel on how to review journal articles. I'm Amanda Halpern. I'm a program specialist here at AGU Publications. And today we have three panelists to discuss this topic. First, we have Deborah Hunsinger, who is an editor on JGR Biogeosciences. Next, we have Ankur Desi, who is also an editor on JGR Biogeosciences. And finally, we have Kristen Cook, who is an associate editor on JGR Earth Surface. So without further ado, let's just jump into it. So we get a lot of questions from people who are really interested in joining the review process, but aren't sure how or aren't sure how it works. So how do you choose reviewers and how do you find reviewers and how do you connect them? Which reviewers go to which journal articles? How does that all work? So I'll start with you, Debbie.
So when we're finding reviewers for papers, the authors will submit a suggested list of reviewers, sometimes 3 to 5 individuals, and so we have that list to draw from. But we also, depending on our familiarity with the topic that's being covered in the paper, we either may know individuals in the field that are experts in that area, and we can turn to them to see if they'll be reviewers on the manuscript. We can look at the list of suggested reviewers. Oftentimes we'll often look at the reference cited in the paper, the manuscript, and look for um, those references that are key to the work being done and the authors on those manuscripts, and maybe look for those individuals as reviewers. We also do receive emails from individuals offering their services as reviewers and letting us know what their expertise is, and we can make note of that, and if we get a paper that falls in their area of expertise, then we can contact those individuals. So it really, we're looking to the peer community and trying to find those individuals that are best suited, given the substance of the manuscript, to review the merit of that work and the paper.
Okay, good. And Anchor, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'd say one thing, I'd echo Debbie's point that if you are interested in wanting to review and you haven't had many invitations, it's completely fair game to email the editor or editor-in-chief of a journal and say, hey, my name is so-and-so, I'm interested. Another thing that you can do that would help is also to have your profile in the AGU profile, have your keywords and expertise, because the other way that we sometimes search for reviewers is also to use the AGU database, which has everyone's names, their keywords, their previous reviews, their previous papers they've published. That often, and there's actually in our system that actually searches all of that information and occasionally gives us suggestions. And so once you're in that system, you're more likely to show up as a potential peer that we might want to include. And I'm often looking for, a range of reviewers. I like to have both senior and early career reviewers sometimes, because sometimes the early career folks have a better perspective on what's hot and new and kind of up on newer methods, while the senior researchers may have a bigger view of the field as a whole and the history of this discipline. So don't feel like you're too early in your career or you're too new at this to join a reviewer pool. You don't even need a PhD to start reviewing. I've often used graduate students who have been wonderful reviewers.
Okay. And Kristen, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, kind of to follow up on Anchor's point, another thing you can do is let your senior colleagues or your supervisors know that you're interested. Often, for example, authors will suggest quite senior people as reviewers, and they often don't have very much time. And so whenever we ask for a review and the reviewer declines, they have the opportunity to suggest alternatives. And this can be a really useful source for us to find people we may not have thought of. And so, I encourage kind of everyone in your network who's more senior to think of you as a possible suggestion to provide to the editors.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, we get a lot of people who do ask about that, and also just generally their early career or their students, and they're not sure how to develop their review skills. So how would you suggest people kind of work on these skills? And I'll start with Anchor this time.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that is, a common in our field is that a lot of things we kind of learn on the job. And certainly with reviewing, that's something where, you know, just honing your skills of being able to read a paper, be able to come up with your sense of whether this paper is useful, advances the field, whether it is, you know, using methods that are understandable and are at what we would expect. You know, reviewing is broadly a form of quality control, and it's part of the same set of skills you need as an individual researcher to be able to evaluate and qualify papers in your own work. So I'd say just, you know, practice whenever you read a paper of like, if I were a reviewer, what would I say about this paper? One thing I like to do in my lab is occasionally I'll get a review request and the editor will be okay with us doing it as a lab review, where we will have the whole group as a whole essentially do the review. And then we in lab meeting actually go through it, and then I'll submit it as a single review, but everyone will have an opportunity to at least put in there and also to get a sense to see if that's a structure. So I'd certainly reach out to your advisor to see if that is something that your lab might be able or willing to do.
Yeah, that's great. Kristen, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, so another resource that is kind of new out there that can help just get a sense for what goes in a review are some of these open review journals. So for example, EGU, all of their journals have a public review process. And so this is a chance for you to go and you can just read review after review and kind of see what sort of things people are usually bringing up, what sort of structure is common. Hopefully you can start to see which ones are good and which ones are not so helpful. Yeah, I mean, and as Ankur says, in our field, we often learn by doing, but we also often learn by example. And so just kind of being able to see a bunch of examples, I think could be helpful.
Okay. And Debbie, do you have anything to add to that?
All those points were really good. I agree with Ankur, like getting practice is probably the best way to gain experience and increase your comfort level and confidence with reviews. In addition to the lab group reviews, I've also, when I was a student and even a postdoc, I would work with my advisors and they might have a paper review and ask me to do an initial review, and then we would discuss their findings of the, like their interpretation of the paper and its weaknesses and strengths. And so I thought that was really helpful, like more of a team-based approach to review with your advisor. I also agree, like looking at some of those open source journals, like where they have discussions and you can look at the feedback that authors have received in a paper. Also, if you've had the benefit of, if you've published and you've received reviews on your own papers, you can look at those for guidance. What was helpful to you as an author? What types of feedback did you find the most constructive? And then try to model your review and your feedback based on that. So putting yourself in the author's step or seat for a little bit and trying to think about, if I were trying to provide the most useful information I could for improving this manuscript, what would those biggest takeaway points be for that author? What should they focus on?
Yeah, and I think that is something we see, at least on our end, come up a lot where people want to know what exactly makes a good review. So what in a review is most helpful to you when you're making a recommendation or a decision? And I'll start with Kristen this time.
Well, that's a big question.
Yes, a big question.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, when we're looking to make a decision, I mean, the first thing we want to know is the science in the paper good? I mean, have they used methods appropriately? Are the assumptions reasonable? Are their results justified by their data? So is the scientific content of the paper, to a good quality and acceptable, basically. And so in a review, we want to know some details around this. And so if you think a paper is great, don't just say, I think the paper is great. You need to give some information, some more details, show that you've read it carefully and carefully considered it, and kind of address each one of these points. So yes, their assumptions are reasonable for this and this reason. Yes, their data make sense and they're interpreted appropriately. So give us the information to go on to show us that you've read and carefully considered the paper.
So is it more helpful for you to have reviewers focus primarily on the science and less on the technical, mechanical aspects of writing, like grammar, spelling, legibility, that kind of thing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to me, there's two purposes for a review. So it's to let the editor know, help to guide the decision. So, and then also to provide constructive feedback for the authors to improve their manuscript. And these can be kind of interlinked things, but kind of the first thing we want to know is the science in the manuscript to our standard. And then after that, you kind of add on the other details.
Okay. And Debbie, I'll pose the same question to you. What's helpful to you when you receive reviews?
When I receive reviews, I think a lot of the things that Kristen said were, are the same with me. It's like we want to know, first, is the paper appropriate for the journal? Usually, the editors are working to try to figure that out before they assign the paper to associate editors and it goes out to review. But we also look for the reviewers to let us know whether it's an appropriate fit for the journal. Kristen mentioned that, are the conclusions supported by the evidence that's presented? Are the methods appropriate? Do they place their work in the context of the field and where things are today? Are their main points clear? And again, are they clearly supported by the evidence presented in the paper? Is it clearly written? Is it easy to follow? Are the figures conveying the important information and feedback that we need to support the work? And then I think that the biggest focus should be on the scientific content of paper and whether it's advancing the field. Is it novel? Is it a new edition, or is it a rehashing of what is already known? The latter would be less attractive in terms of a paper that's being published in our journal and JGR journal. And then if it's poorly written, I think that you can just state that from the outset that it needs significant improvement in terms of language and flow, and don't spend time trying to correct grammar in any way, because that's just that's not a good use of your time. As a reviewer, a better use of your time is to really focus on the key messages of the work, and whether you feel that the results and the paper itself advance understanding in the field.
Okay. And I'll post this.
I will add to it, like, if it's so poorly written that you can't understand anything, then that also can be an issue. And that's usually, if we have language issues in a paper that make it difficult to follow, we might return it to the authors for improvement before it can really be reviewed by peers.
Yeah, that's definitely good to look out for. So Anchor, I'll pose the same question to you.
Yeah, great points all around. One thing to think about of peer review and the scientific literature process as a whole is that, view papers as a structured conversation about nature, right? Written by people going back and forth, trying to understand what is going on in the world and how can we use experiments to understand those. And so what I want to see as in a review is that paper making that conversation, or is it getting lost in some aspect that doesn't advance that conversation? And one thing to think about as a reviewer is that you really have a couple different audiences, right? One audience is the editor, where you are making one of several recommendations, and a couple other reviewers, potentially associate or handling editor. And it's my job as an editor to kind of take each of those reviews, including their recommendations, and make a decision about whether we're moving forward with this conversation and hopefully eventually see the light of day as a journal article, or whether we're telling the authors that, you really need to do a lot more work and move and try again. And so what I'd like to see in the beginning of a review is kind of a summary statement, your 1 or 2 sentence of like, what is this paper about and what does it mean to you? and also for you to justify the recommendation you make. So if you're saying this needs major revisions, give me 1 or 2 sentences for why you believe this is going to require a substantial amount of effort to revise. Or if you're recommending rejection, why you believe this paper is not ready for prime time. And then when it comes to the audience, the other audience, of course, is the authors who want to get their papers published and who want to make their papers better. And from there, really having precise and detailed constructive criticism, right? So saying by line number or paragraph number or section, you know, I don't understand this, or this claim that you make is not supported by the data, and being constructive as well as what would it take for you to be able to accept this result or to move forward, to say, if the authors were doing this, I'd be more willing to say that this is supported, right? Not to make them do the study you wish they did, right? Because that's something we don't want reviewers really telling authors, but really to say, how do we make this paper, given the structure and the methods that they're using, stronger?
Yeah, I think those are all really great points. And then just kind of on the flip side of that question, what is one or a few common mistakes you see reviewers make that you would like to tell them not to do, or just give them advice on how to correct? So I'll start with you, Debbie.
Oh, just a two come to mind right away, and I'm sure more will come to mind as others offer their insight as well. But first, and I mentioned this before, I think early career reviewers tend to focus in more on, you know, the mechanics of the paper, maybe some phrasing or spelling errors or language errors, and they don't spend enough time focusing on the science. So that's one thing that I've seen, or they don't provide that summary statement that Ankur was mentioning. They provide a lot of very detailed feedback on figures and statements within the paper, but they don't provide that summative feedback of, this is my takeaway of this you know, the strengths and weaknesses of this manuscript, and here's support for my recommendation for how this paper should or should not move forward in the revision and the review process. And then I think the other mistake that individuals make is, and this goes along with, you know, one of the comments that Ankur just made, is that, you know, you have to kind of not make this, you know, review the paper that you have, not the paper that you wish that it was. And so sometimes we get feedback from reviewers suggesting work that is clearly out of the scope of the paper. And so it's something that the authors either would have a very difficult time addressing or could not possibly address in a revision. And so that type of feedback isn't very constructive because it's trying to create a different paper than what is presented. And maybe the feedback is this paper is not publication worthy because of some specific reasons. But if it's just that you would have done it differently and you would have, you know, used a different model or collected a different set of data, maybe those options are not available and they're out of scope of the review, and you have to look at the paper that you have and see if there's merit enough there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Ankur, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, iterating again, the need for making it clear why you're making your recommendation, and, you know, which makes my job easier. And really, so that I can write a decision letter that specifically says what are the biggest points, right? Organizing your review. So a very common structure, of course, is summary statement followed by the major points, followed by the minor. I think sometimes early new reviewers feel like they have to fix every single problem in a paper, and that's not the case, right? You're one of a few reviewers, and your job is to kind of focus on the 3 or 4 biggest points that you really need this paper to work on, right? Sometimes this paper is going to go through multiple rounds anyway, and it's likely that if there's other points you have, they will be picked up by other reviewers down the road. And I think the other point that I do like to make to all reviewers is to always, when you write a review, kind of go back and check on your implicit biases that you may have on the paper. Are you making certain assumptions because of the national origin or background of the author based on their name, because you know their names, you're anonymous to them. Are you making certain assumptions because of what institution they're at or what gender they are, or anything like that? And it may or may not be obvious to you, but using gender neutral language, for example, and avoiding ad hominem attacks, or saying, oh, this is just a PhD student's dissertation. It's, things like that are not appropriate in reviews, as well as calling out that this should be fixed by a native speaker. That kind of language is also inappropriate. Focus on the material, not on the person. And that's something that I think we all benefit from, just always doing a double check after we write a review. Am I doing this fairly? Because often things come out when we're not thinking about it.
Yeah. Kristen, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think Ankur makes a really good point, and just about kind of the tone of reviews in general. I mean, this is not antagonistic. You're not we want your opinion of the paper, but we're not necessarily asking you to go pick through it, kind of, looking for, every problem, you can dig out, even if it takes a bit of an effort to dig out the problems. This should be a collaborative effort. It should be, so, and kind of think about writing the review in that tone. And to try to avoid kind of unnecessarily harsh and negative language. I mean, it's not all great to receive reviews with things like, well, the authors failed in this, or, things like that. I mean, you can just say, well, maybe the authors could consider to do this. And so, just think about the type of review you would like to receive. And try to write that type of review.
Yeah, and I think all of your answers kind of connect to another question we get a lot, which is, how should you go about managing your time when writing a review? So I know, of course, time management is an issue everyone faces, especially now, but should a reviewer, sit down and do it in one take, or should they pace it out? How would you best advise someone to work on just planning out how they review? So we'll start with you, Ankur.
Okay. Well, I often give general talks about time management, and one of my bottom lines is there is no one right way to manage your time. Everyone's got a way that works for them, and the best thing for you to do is to discover what works for you. But when it does come to reviews, right, this is one of these tasks that can stretch out over time. You're often given a deadline or an expected deadline. It's completely okay to reach out to the editor to say, I might need an extra week or something like that. Is that okay? But what I do, and what works for me when I'm peer reviewing, is when I first get to paper, I'll budget some time, maybe within that week or so, to just do a scan of the paper. And so what I'll do is just kind of do that like 5-minute big picture view. I'll read the abstract, look at the figures, kind of look at the main findings, and just ask, like, does this seem like it's on the right track, or is there going to be some things I'm going to have problems with right away? And I'll just take some notes. I used to print out papers, but now I'll just do it on PDF, and just be like, here's some things I should be looking for. And then I'll put the paper away, because sometimes my best ideas about something come, in the shower or on a walk or a bike ride or something like that. And then maybe another week I'll budget, an hour or something to do a closer read, where I'll be reading the paper from start to finish and making notes as I go along on a text file. And they might be very unstructured notes, but I'll try to make sure I'm including line numbers and other pieces of information, so that when I do write my review, I can kind of take my notes and turn them into text. And then I'll do that piece last down the road, usually as I'm submitting it. We really, really love getting our reviews before the deadline, but like I mentioned, it's completely normal that sometimes life happens. Sometimes the paper takes longer just because it's requiring more effort or time. And as one thing I know, whenever you start a task in this field, the first few times you do it takes forever. And as you do it more and more often, you get faster at it, you get more efficient at it, you learn how to address some of the limitations you might have in terms of getting through a review. So keep doing them, you'll get faster at it.
Okay, Kristen, do you have any advice to add on to that?
I actually do quite a similar process as Ankur, except I do print out papers still. I like to take them to the park to read for the initial read-throughs. yeah, so quick read, and then it kind of percolates in my mind a bit for a while. Often as I'm writing up the review, things will start to kind of, yeah, raise more questions. So I'll often find myself while I'm in the writing phase flipping back and forth just to check, you know, does this figure match this table, and does this all make sense? Yeah, I mean, sometimes it often depends on the paper. Some might require more more effort. Sometimes you might want to be looking up some of the reference papers in there, or some of the literature. But yeah, I find this kind of multi-step process with a break in between is really effective for me.
Okay. And Debbie, do you have anything to add to those answers?
Those are all really good suggestions. I too tend to print my papers out that I'm reviewing because I have like screen fatigue sometimes, so I like to sit down with the paper and make notes on um, the paper copy as I'm reading through. I agree that you get faster as you get experience and the more you do a task. And so the first few reviews are going to take you much longer than you think they should. Um, and you know, some papers, like Kristen mentioned, are going to take longer than others, and it just depends on the nature of the paper. I would say too, you know, it's important. I think deadlines are important to try to keep in mind. And if you feel already overwhelmed in your schedule and there's a lot of things going on, it maybe is an indication not to accept an invitation to review a paper if you don't feel that you can meet the deadline in a reasonable way. Um, and then I would, you know, make sure that you note it in your calendar, and you set aside time to do that review, and a couple blocks of time that was mentioned, because typically it's going to take a couple blocks of time. But depending, you know, regardless of what your approach is, whether you like to sit back and give a general assessment first, and then, you know, think about it, and then come back and provide, you know, more feedback in your notes, or whether you want to sit down and really go through that paper in one sitting first, and then come back and review your suggested feedback. Um, Everybody's approach is going to be different, but I think it's important to really budget the time to do it, particularly when you first start out doing it, because and budget more time than you think it's going to take. It's probably a good recommendation.
Yeah, I think those are all good recommendations. And speaking of time, it looks like we have time for one more question. So I'll end with another kind of big one. But, you know, the reason we're having this panel is because there are a lot of people who are interested in reviewing but feel like they have trouble finding resources on it or just aren't sure what to do. So from your perspectives as associate editors and editors, what is one thing you really want to convey to the people watching this panel? What do you want to tell reviewers who are watching? And I'll start with you, Kristen.
Um, yeah, I mean, for early career people who are a bit doubtful about what they have to offer, I would say we do want you to review. You do have a lot to offer. You know, you do have expertise, and if we ask you for a review, it's because we believe in your expertise and we want to hear from you. So don't be kind of too shy to offer yourself up. Yeah, we value your input, and you should be confident in giving it.
Yeah, and Debbie, do you have any advice you want to pass along?
Yeah, I really agree with that. You know, we oftentimes in our earlier parts of our career are doubtful of our contributions to the community, and I think that you know, if we're asking you for a review, it's because we feel you have the expertise to provide and critically evaluate the paper. Um, and then the other thing is, I feel like, you know, don't shy away from reviews because of whether you're doubtful of your abilities or your time, because I feel the more you review manuscripts, the better that of a writer you become. So the better your own manuscripts become. So it's a service to the community, but it also is a service to your own work, because um, you you can see what works well and what doesn't work well in a paper in terms of conveying key points and key ideas, structuring manuscripts in that way. And so I feel that it's a service that we can provide to the community, but it also makes ourselves better scientists in the process.
Great. And Ankur, do you have anything you want to add?
No, this is good. All I want to say is for those who have reviewed and done review, just thank you, right? Thank you for taking the time and effort to make science progress and move forward. You know, we all have an obligation. If none of us reviewed, then there would be no journals, there'd be no literature. But don't feel pressured that you have to do these, reviews. It's okay to say no. And when you do say no, what we love to hear is your suggestions for who you think might be great at this. And recommendations are often as much as what we're looking for sometimes, as whether you have to do this review or not. But it is somewhat of an obligation in our field as researchers to kind of contribute to reviews when we can, and to reach out and seek out opportunities to do so, and to don't let your sense of your sense of that you maybe are too junior or early for this to keep you from saying yes or from learning more about how to review. And there are lots of great resources beyond this panel online, and from some of our great reviewers who have posted tips and tricks on social media and elsewhere. There's certainly worth looking and reading over.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all so much for participating. I think you've given a lot of really great answers that are hopefully really helpful to the people watching, and thank you to the people watching for attending this panel. If you have any further questions, you can either email the journal inboxes for specific guidance on reviewing for certain journals, or if you have questions at fall meeting, you can come to AGU Central and we are happy to help you further. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So hi, I'm Amanda Halpern from AGU Publications and from the panel you just watched. So this is the live portion of the discussion. If you have any questions you would like us to answer, please feel free to put them in the chat box. And again, I just want to thank Ankur, Debbie, and Kristen for participating in our discussion. And I'd also like to thank Michael Atto, who's an associate editor on JGR Earth Surface, for providing advice for associate editors on how to use reviews in their recommendations. You can find that advice as part of our how to submit and how to review early career packet at AGU Central under the publications tabs. And that, even if you're not an associate editor, I would really suggest going and reading his advice just to see how your reviews are used in the recommendation process. It's really useful to help contextualize how your work is used. So just to start off, before we jump into the questions, I'm going to share my screen so you can see what the review submission form looks like if you are a reviewer for an AGU journal. So let me just go ahead and do that. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, good. So if you accept a review invitation, you'll be sent a link to a screen like this one. You'll see two tabs at the top. On the left, you have the Files and Details tab, where you can read and download any files you receive, or any files that are a part of the submission. And then, of course, you have the review form where you can put in your review. I'm just going to go through this really quickly. Hopefully, it'll answer some of your questions about how you can specifically review for our journals and what kinds of things are required as part of a review. So just to start, at the top, you see here some basic information about the manuscript, including which editor invited you, what date the review is due, the number for your manuscript, the title of the manuscript, the corresponding author, and then any additional contributing authors. This example only has one author, but if there were additional authors like Emilio Estevez or Ali Sheedy, they would be in this box. So then after that, you jump down to this general evaluation section. The system provides a number of questions to help you in writing your review. As you can see, each question has a drop-down box with answers, so you can select to answer this and then elaborate on them further down in the detailed review section, which I'll get to in one moment. So you can go through these questions. Of all of these questions, the most important question to answer is, what is your overall recommendation for this manuscript? This question is required by the system, and you aren't able to submit your review without answering. So we provide 5 types of recommendations, from reject outright, reject but maybe encourage resubmission, to either major or minor revisions, or publish as is. And then just after you have those list of questions to help you in your review, there's just a brief question: do you think this paper is worthy of additional promotion, either via social media or an editor's Vox on EOS, that kind of thing? So you can either say yes or no. And if you think this paper does warrant further attention, you can just explain briefly why here. And then below that, you can just say if you're willing to review a revision of the manuscript. And like we emphasized in the discussion, it's okay to say no to certain things. So if you don't think you have the bandwidth, or if you don't think you have further contributions, it's okay to say no to this question. And then just here, you can answer if you have a potential conflict of interest. We outline types of conflicts of interests above and at this link, but if you're not sure, the best course of action is always just to email the journal inbox and ask, my situation, do you think this is a conflict of interest? So below that is where you can type out your review in more detail. You're also welcome to upload it as an external file, such as a doc file or a PDF, and that you just do at the bottom in the attachment section. But here, if you'd prefer to type it out, you can just do so in this box. Now, it's very important to note that there are 2 boxes here. Anything you type in the top box can be seen by authors. So typically, AGU reviews are anonymous, but you're welcome to share your name if you'd prefer. So if you put your name in this box, the authors will know. Anything you want to share with the editor, but you don't want the authors to see, you would just put in the box below that. And that's also just important to note. Don't put your review in the second box, because then the authors won't be able to respond to your comments. So just make sure to distinguish between those 2 when you're working on your review. The one other required section for your review, or the system won't let you submit, is this commentary section. So here it just asks, do you think this paper warrants a further commentary, further discussion? And you can either say yes and explain why, or say no and move on. And then finally, here's where you can upload any external attachments, such as Word document, annotated PDF, that kind of thing. All of the files you upload here, the titles will automatically change. So for example, I uploaded a file earlier, and the title changed to reviewer number 3, review attachment 1, because I'm the 3rd reviewer and this is the first attachment I uploaded. If you uploaded anything by mistake, you can just delete it by clicking delete and then save. Just so you know, while the title changes, the content doesn't. So make sure, if you would like to remain anonymous, that your name is not included in the track changes or the comments of a PDF. And then finally, you can either save this form and continue working on it later, or you can submit it and send it along to the editor. So now I'm going to switch back to the chat function and answer some questions. Let me just... One second. Okay, so let's look at that chat box. Okay. How should reviewers respond to manuscripts that have significant issues with language to the point that it's difficult to understand? I know that some journals have English language services. Is it reasonable to suggest this sort of thing? So yes, it is reasonable to suggest this sort of thing. AGU journals don't provide this service, but there are external services that we have worked with and I believe are linked on our website as resources. And editors often do this too. Ideally, you won't be sent a manuscript to review if the language is too difficult to even get to the science. But yes, editors do appreciate your comments on this, and authors too, especially because they want to make sure their points are getting across. So if you do see issues with the language, you should definitely bring it up in your review. Okay, and then, is it ethical to disclose my manuscripts to my coworkers? Could you elaborate on that question in the box? Do you mean, is it ethical to share the manuscripts, or is it ethical to mention that you're working on a certain review? And while you do that, there's one more. Sarah did touch on this previously, but just to emphasize with the question about novelty and how to determine the best level of novelty, that's really journal specific. So I would suggest you email the journal inbox and the editor can answer any questions. They can't pre-read your manuscript, obviously, but if you're not entirely sure, they can answer questions about scope and novelty, for example, just beforehand. Okay, I'm going to let Sarah answer the question about sharing the manuscript.
Hey everyone, my name is Sarah Day. I'm a program manager with AGU, so I'm responsible for about 7 AGU journals. So I'm going to talk a little bit about ethics since our question was about sharing manuscripts. So generally when you're asked to review, you're asked to review as a confidential. These manuscripts are not published yet and are not generally widely available. So we want the reviewers' opinions and expertise to help them get to a publishable quality, and they're not ready to be shared with the general public yet. However, there are some exceptions to that. Anchor talked a little bit about in the panel discussion that if you want to have a co-reviewer, if you have a postdoc, if you have a student, if you wanted to use your lab to review, those can be possible, but you do need to run anything like that by the editor who assigned you the review. So you can just shoot them an email and ask them, tell them what you want to do and why, and they'll let you know whether it's possible. There are a lot of journals that really do want to encourage co-reviewing as a way to teach early career and postdocs more about reviewing and more about what we'd like to see in reviews. So it never hurts to ask.
Yeah, I agree with what Sarah said. We are always looking for new ways to help, particularly early career folk, kind of learn more about the review process. And that's actually something we're really hoping to expand on next year at AGU. So as part of our efforts to kind of update our reviewer resources, we sent out a survey at the beginning of this year, back in March, all the way back in March. We put it out as part of AG Universe just to kind of get feedback from reviewers to see, okay, what parts of the process work for you? Where can we improve? What kind of resources are you looking for? So we got all of this great feedback and we've been analyzing it. And next year we do plan on taking this analysis and putting it forward to expand on our reviewer resources. So one area in particular, which relates to this, is helping early career scientists learn how to review, because we do acknowledge that there are a number of grad programs where this isn't taught. So we would like to help people learn the ropes. And so that's part of why we have this session, and then part of why some of our reviewers do that kind of co-reviewing thing that Sarah and Unger discussed. So if you are interested in a co-review, definitely reach out to the journal inbox to confirm that's okay. Let's see if anybody else has any questions in the chat. Well, while you think of questions, I do have just some more general information about reviewing for AGU. So typically, our manuscripts use 2 to 3 reviewers. So your review is obviously considered in conjunction with the other ones. And I think actually somebody had a question in here about, yeah, okay, the novelty question. How do editors consider different reviewer opinions? So this does obviously come up a fair amount because we do use multiple reviewers for each manuscript. So that's part of why we do ask those questions in the review form and why editors prefer more detailed reviews as to just, yes, this is good. So when you have that detailed explanation, the editors can consider your arguments and look at the two side by side or three side by side and say, okay, I see reviewer one's point, but ultimately I think reviewer two made a stronger case, or vice versa. In certain cases, editors will bring in a third or fourth reviewer if the reviews are split, just to get an additional opinion. And that's also a key reason why our manuscripts use associate editors. Not all AGU journals use associate editors, but most of them do. And the associate editor is the person who invites the reviewers and then writes a recommendation based on those reviews for the editor to then ultimately make a decision. So the associate editor often acts as an intermediary to help with the decision, just to weigh the pros and cons of each side, and then to kind of help deal with that conflict of, well, reviewer one said yes, but reviewer two said no. Okay. So let's see. And if you asked a question earlier and I accidentally skipped it, please feel free to throw it in again, just to kind of bump it up to the top. So also just one other point I'd like to touch on, since this is obviously about how to review. If you're interested in becoming a reviewer for one of our journals, but you're not sure how to get your foot in the door, this was touched on in the panel, but I just kind of want to emphasize. You can email the journal inboxes with a copy of your CV and with your cover letter, just explaining your area of expertise, just to let the editor know, hi, I'm interested in reviewing. Please consider me for future reviews. And the editor will keep your name on file, keep your information on file, and hopefully reach out to you for any future needs. Because we are always looking for new reviewers, and at AGU we're really trying to diversify and expand our reviewer pool. And one way to help do that is just to let us know that you're here and you're interested. And so similarly, if you're interested in becoming an associate editor for a journal, I would suggest you email the journal inbox specifically and outline with a copy of your CV and just a cover letter outlining why you think you're qualified. I don't think we're looking for any new associate editors at the moment. We might be, it's always good to have that on file just in case. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure, but the journals really rely on associate editors to help with specific disciplines. So again, if you're interested, definitely reach out. It's always a great way to make sure we know that you're there and that you're interested.
Also, some editors end up picking, when they need to expand their associate editor pool for a specific field, some of the top reviewers in that area. So if you're already reviewing for a journal, just accepting more and providing good detailed reviews is another way to show the editor that you're interested.
So the time commitment for associate editors definitely varies from journal to journal. It's a 2-year overall commitment, but then in terms of the day-to-day, it depends. So if you're working on one of the JGR journals, you'll probably have a heavier workload. Like JGR Atmospheres is one of the journals I work on. Those associate editors, I don't have the specific statistics in front of me, but they're given a number of manuscripts and then they assign reviewers. Reviewers get the reviews back to them within, for that journal, 21 days. Once you receive the reviews, the associate editors ideally would get their recommendation completed within 10 days of both reviews being received. And again, this time frame varies from journal to journal, but it's the 10 days is roughly the same. So overall, again, if you're interested in just commitment timelines, I would reach out to the journal inbox. And then to answer the next question, what's the minimum requirement for being an associate editor? I'm sorry, I keep repeating myself. That is a question I would definitely suggest asking for the journal inbox, because it's not something we necessarily say, oh, you must have 5 years doing this or 3 years doing this. As Sarah mentioned, a lot of the time, a lot of the ways people become associate editors is through reviewing. That's how editors get to know you and get to see what kind of contributions you make. So the best way to become an associate editor is to give these detailed reviews like Sarah was mentioning. But there's no strict, you must have X level of experience.
And also, in case the question for requirement was on like time requirement or number of manuscripts, that can vary from journals. Smaller journals, there's some associate editors that only handle like 5 to 10 manuscripts. Some larger journals, like one of my journals is GRL, they will handle hundreds. So the time commitment can vary dramatically. And sometimes there's a smaller time commitment for niche areas just because they really need someone with those special expertise. So if you're worried about the amount of time involved, if you have an invitation, definitely ask the editor. That's probably my big theme. Check back in if you're concerned about something. Sometimes we can make things work.
Yeah, just kind of to go off of that, that's a big theme overall. Editors do like answering these questions. That's part of why they're editors. So if you're unsure about a certain aspect of your review, or if you're unsure about what it takes to be an associate editor or what it takes to be a reviewer, I would really suggest reaching out to the journal inboxes with those types of questions so editors can provide specific feedback. So let's see if there are any other questions. One question that came up in our survey that I haven't seen come up in the chat yet that you might have is people often ask, well, how do I know? And it came up in our discussion, but people often ask, how do I know which recommendation type to make? And that, again, is one where it's not, the manuscript must meet X requirements to be rejected and Y requirements to be rejected with encouragement to resubmit. We do offer a lot of freedom in your reviews because we really value your opinion and we don't want you to feel kind of boxed in by certain things. So the questions I showed you in the review form were just their guiding questions. So if if you're not sure with that, also editors can consult and say, okay, I see what you're saying, and I'll ultimately lean reject and resubmit over just reject. I see another question came in while I was talking. So where can we find journal inbox emails? You can find them on the publications page. I'm actually going to share my screen again just to help you navigate because sometimes the website can be a little tricky. Okay, so here is my screen. And if you go to agu.org/publish with us, actually, you know what, let me show you just agu.org. Don't even remember that other part, I use that. So you go to the main page and you scroll down, you can see this box that says AGU Journals. You click on that, and then you'll see down here a list of all of our journals. And you can click on, let's say, advances. You want to email the advances inbox. It will take you to this page, and you can just go to About, Contact Us, and that provides you with the journal email. And that works for all of our journals. So that's just a really quick way to find out how to email the inbox specifically. And then, yeah, Sarah also put that in the chat. Okay.
Also, to work off something Amanda recently said, if you're struggling with a decision or why you made a decision for recommendation, that's one of the things you can use the notes to editors box about. You can say, here are the things that I was concerned with and why I made this choice. We really want to make sure you put all the detailed comments in the part where the author can see it, but if there's anything you want to qualify what you decided just for the editor's own information, that's a good use of that box.
And again, with the review form, it's not required to put anything in that box. The only two absolutely required sections are you have to pick a decision type and you have to say whether or not you think a commentary should be written for that article, because the review form is really more of an outline, like I've been saying, to help you figure out how to best construct your review to help both the authors work on revisions and the editors ultimately make a decision. Let's see. I know we only have a few more minutes left, so I'm trying to see if there's any kind of last minute question I can answer before we wrap up here. Oh, here's one. If there are just sections or points on a paper I don't feel comfortable with reviewing, if you're not knowledgeable on a specific topic, how do I let the editor know? Does it inhabilitate me from reviewing such a paper? So ultimately, ideally, you'll be able to kind of gauge what the paper's about from the invitation. But once you get the paper and you realize, oh, I'm not qualified to answer a certain section, you can definitely use that notes to editors box to say, unfortunately, I wasn't able to provide expert analysis on the methods because I'm not an expert in this area. So it depends really on how much of the paper you feel like you're not qualified to review, because you can always withdraw as an editor or as a reviewer if you ultimately realize, oh, I'm not actually qualified. I thought I was, but then I wasn't. Or if you were accidentally accepted by mistake. So just really gauge that. If it's a small portion of the paper, I would say go ahead with the review because editors, they picked you for a reason. But if you really feel like you can't you're not qualified to answer, I would suggest emailing that journal inbox and just telling the editor, I'm sorry, it turns out I'm not actually qualified. And we can just really quickly take you off the paper and find a new person to look at the paper. And so here I see a question. Earlier it was mentioned that CoreView is encouraged as a way to help early career scientists. If I self-recommend to become an associate editor, would I receive some guidance or mentorship to perform my role? Presumably the editor considered myself qualified. So right now in our journals, we don't have an official mentorship program. The editors are definitely available to answer any questions you have. And we do provide training, obviously, because we don't expect you to know everything. So if you are selected to be an associate editor, you do get training from one of the managers, such as Sarah, just explaining how the system works and answering any questions you might have about the process. And then the editors are always available to answer questions on an ad hoc basis. And really a lot of the process is learning through experience. So I do see we have about 1 minute left. So I just wanted to point out that this panel is scheduled for 2 other times during fall meeting, once on the 9th and once on the 16th. So for those, the first 30-minute pre-recorded session will be the same, but the second half will be another live session. So if you have any additional questions or need any further clarification on reviewing, please feel free to jump in and attend those sessions as well. If you have any questions about reviewing for a particular journal, like we've been emphasizing, we would highly suggest you email the journal inbox specifically because they're best equipped to answer your specific journal questions. And if you have any questions about this panel, specifically, you're welcome to message me through the Fall Meeting Messenger app or email me ahalprin@agu.org. So again, I just want to thank you for attending this panel, and I hope you have a great rest of your fall meeting. Bye.